It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Nazis are bad. Zombies are bad. Nazi zombies are really bad, and that's what we've got on this week's Monster Mondays. The story of Shockwaves begins first in 1973, where Columbia University students Reuben Train and Ken Wiederhorn won the Academy Award for Best Dramatic Student Film. This was the first time the award was handed out after a decision the year before to open a special category within the short subjects branch of the Academy was made. They won a cool $5,000 as one of the selected winners. The award itself was an engraved trophy designed by Saul Bass, who was a member of the Academy. Later, several of the winners ultimately became official Oscar nominees in the live-action short subject category. Now, Wiederhorn really wanted to get into documentary filmmaking. After college, he had been working as an editor in the documentary unit for CBS. Things would kind of go off the rails because in order to really graduate to be a producer or director of the CBS documentaries, he was told that he needed two things. He needed experience or a journalism degree, which he didn't really have enough of either. Yeah, he made student films, but he certainly didn't have a journalism degree, and more so than anything else, that kept him from really progressing with the documentary unit for CBS. But when he had the opportunity to do so, he took Train up on the offer to direct a film in Florida. And that film would be Shockwaves. Now, the people funding the movie had a major requirement. The movie had to be a horror movie. It's widely known that horror has always been the genre that was easiest to win back your money through box office ticket sales. And Wiederhorn wasn't really much of a horror guy, but he thought about what would be scary. And he came across a book called The Morning of the Magicians that discussed how kind of into magic and arcane shit the Nazis were. And Nazis are a great bad guy, and Wiederhorn knew it then. Between that and the popularity of zombies, this was what Shockwaves was going to be about. Now, filming commenced in 1975 down in Florida for around $150,000. Now, another $50,000 or so needed to be raised to actually finish the film once they got rolling. But the film got finished and hit theaters in late 1977. But sadly, the movie would kind of hurt Wiederhorn and his hopes of becoming a documentary filmmaker. He got his experience in making movies, but because he made an exploitation horror movie, his employers at CBS weren't overly impressed. And, you know, he ended up leaving CBS, but worked fairly regularly in the 80s and into the early 90s on movies and TV shows. So he still got to make movies, but mostly genre movies in the horror side of things. So it kind of unfortunately took away his hopes of making documentaries. But at the top of the cast list for this movie, we have Peter Cushing. Now, of course, Cushing worked often in horror, and he did good work. And one thing that might have actually worked for the movie, at least to get released in September of 1977, was that just a few months before, he appeared in Star Wars. So it was possible at one point in time to go to a movie theater and see both Star Wars and Shockwaves all in one day. But playing Rose in this movie is Brooke Adams in her actual first film credit. Now, she had appeared in a few films earlier in the 70s, but all of those were uncredited. Her bits in 1976's Car Wash were deleted. So while she had appeared on lots of TV before trying to make the jump to film, it turned out that Shockwaves would become her first appearance in a movie. But right after this, she would kind of hit it big. The following year, she appeared in Days of Heaven by Terrence Malick, where she starred with Richard Gere and Sam Shepard. That same year as Days of Heaven, she also appeared in the incredibly successful remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in which she became one of the first people to realize that there was something amiss with some of the people that were known well to the people who were kind of seeing these changes. This included Brooke Adams' character's live-in boyfriend had started to act differently. So she was really kind of hitting it big right after this movie was released. Now, one surprising thing about Brooke Adams that I do want to say before we get into this movie is that while she had a nice, long, 50-plus year career in acting, and she appeared in lots of interesting things and has been married to actor Tony Shalhoub for over 30 years, her Wikipedia page is surprisingly short. It's likely that, she's mostly kept private, but she's appeared in several movies that were either impactful or famous, particularly between the release of this movie and the very early 90s. But, oh well. Let's talk about some zombie Nazis. The movie opens by talking about just before the onset of World War II, the SS did experiments to create essentially what would be super soldiers. The Germans knew of an ancient mystical power that came from the earth itself, which gifted people the power to, quote, fight without weapons or shields. And even the American forces told tales of fighting an army of Germans who fought without these things and killed with their bare hands. One of the other things that's mentioned is that of all of the different battles that were fought, that none of the Allies had ever captured one of these mysterious bare hand fighting SS troops. Now we see Rose in the present, played by Brooke Adams, adrift on a boat being rescued by a couple of fishermen, and she begins to tell her story. Now Rose, along with other vacationers, are on this kind of recreation boat. The boat's captain is Ben, a grumpy old man played by John Carradine. Soon, a strange orange mist forms over the sun, and under the water, the wreckage of a ship begins to stir. As Ben and his first mate Keith become disturbed by a sound they can't quite place, Ben decides it's time to start the engines back up and get going. Now, one of the passengers, Norman, is a used car salesman who is generally displeased with this getaway and wants to convince the other passengers and crew on this boat to more or less mutiny in order to turn the boat around and get back to land. It's kind of funny now that I think about it in retrospect. Norman probably, if people did what he wanted, even though he's a jerk, it would have saved a lot of people's lives. But anyway, when she can't sleep that night, Rose talks to Keith, who reveals that he's not entirely sure where they are because the ship's compass has been out all day, which is maybe another sign that things are going to start turning south here. But soon, the boat is sideswiped by a large cargo ship. When Ben fires a flare to see what's kind of going on, see if they can figure out what they hit or what hit them, everyone sees a wrecked ship that's been seemingly rotting for decades. And of course, Ben kind of laughs it off as, oh, that's a ghost ship or whatever, but he doesn't really believe in that. And it's very likely that most people just kind of believe that the boat drifted too close to this derelict ship. But the next day, people realize that Ben is missing, and the boat that they're on is still stopped. And they discover that the ship is damaged and taking on water. So it's essentially unsafe to keep the passengers on board, and it's not really in condition for them to be able to sail on. Sure, it's not taking on too much water too fast, but it's enough to make a difference. So Keith ends up taking the passengers to a nearby island where one of the passengers, Chuck, spots an abandoned hotel. And soon after, they discover Ben's body. They assume that he might have drowned by going underneath the boat to check for damage, but they're not entirely sure. When the passengers and crew go to the hotel, they see it hasn't been operational for quite some time. But meanwhile, underwater, there's a man in a Nazi uniform with white hair, lesions on his face, and goggles covering his eyes, walking along the floor of the sea before poking his head out of the water to come ashore. Much to the surprise of the 6 shipwreck survivors, they hear music playing on an old phonograph inside the hotel. They are then addressed by a voice with a German accent asking why they're there. And he realizes they do need help, and he's surprised to hear about the wreckage of a ship off the coast. And he goes to investigate, and about the same time, several more of these Nazi ghouls rise out of the water to make landfall. The ship's cook, Dobbs, is off collecting stuff to prepare for dinner, and he is soon attacked by the Nazi zombies. However, before they could kill him, he actually gets got by sea urchins, and he falls into a bunch of sea urchins that actually kill him before the zombies do. But inside the hotel, the old man, played by Peter Cushing, tells Keith that he's got a small boat they can use to leave the island, but they must go quickly. This is a bad time to be here, and as he puts it, there's danger in the water. Later, Rose finds Dobbs's body, and it's soon revealed that he had something in his hand, and it looks like a torn piece of cloth that has, it looks like it came from a uniform with an SS symbol on it. Keith, Chuck, and Norman see a couple of the SS soldiers in the distance watching them, and so they confront the old man, who happens to have a lot of Nazi stuff hanging up inside the hotel. The old man says it's too late for them now. They were very stupid for not having escaped with the boat, and the old man tells the men he was the commander of what was called the Death Corps. His men were bloodthirsty and unstoppable. They were actually created by science, and that they were too good at killing. He was told to keep the Death Corps safe from capture when the war was coming to an end, but he never received the next orders after he loaded them on a boat and sent them offshore. He then exiled himself to the island and tried to sink the ship, but at long last, the Death Corps have returned. Keith, Rose, and Norman's wife Beverly find the boat the SS commander told them about. Meanwhile, the commander attempts to communicate with the zombies and tries to stop them or try to call them away, but they disobey his commands. Eventually, he runs afoul of one of his former soldiers and is killed. The shipwrecked survivors start to slowly make their way down this river out toward the ocean, but they are stalked by Nazi zombies under the water. And soon, they do get the boat out into the open sea, but they continue to be stalked by the zombies. But unfortunately, during this process, the boat is lost to them because they all piled out of it to guide the boat around a mud bank. And then they all become separated from it when Beverly kind of trips and falls in the water. Soon, the zombies get an upper hand by way of the passengers becoming separated. Norman is the next to die as he goes off looking for Beverly and gets attacked by a zombie waiting under the water for him. Rose is attacked next, but she's actually able to get away from one of the zombies, and she also discovers the zombie's weakness. When she pulls off his goggles, the zombie starts to flail about and eventually collapses and dies. So Keith, Rose, Beverly, and Chuck try to barricade themselves in the hotel's giant refrigerator. However, Chuck falls victim to claustrophobia and also accidentally lets off a flare gun that temporarily blinds Beverly. With Chuck out in the open, he is soon killed by one of the zombies. Keith and Rose hide in a furnace room inside the hotel while Beverly attempts to hide within a closet. Believing she heard Keith and Rose walking about outside of the closet, she is then attacked by a zombie and drowned in a fish tank. Since there is now only 2 of them left, Keith and Rose are able to use the smaller rowboat from the ship to escape the island. However, Keith is attacked by a zombie in the water, He kills that zombie by ripping off its goggles, and he gets back to the rowboat, but a second zombie attacks and drowns him, leaving Rose the only survivor that we saw at the beginning of the movie. She then is seen at the hospital recovering from her wounds and everything that she's gone through. She begins repeating her story over and over and over again, and what she's writing in her journal as if she's telling the story herself is just gobbledygook. It's just scratches and it doesn't read anything. And it turns out that Rose likely never truly recovered from the incident and has gone insane. Let's talk about 3 things that I like about Shockwaves. First, I really do like the tone of this movie. It's not a jump scare type of movie. It's just a movie that's full of impending terror and dread. And a lot of that has to do with the music by Richard Einhorn, who worked with director Ken Wiederhorn on other projects, including Eyes of a Stranger and Dark Tower. He does a great job with a low tone, synthesized kind of droning score. It's really great. And aside from that, the pacing in the movie may be slow for some people's taste, but I think it's a good pace for this much more mood heavy type of horror film. The ghost ship, the loneliness of the ship the passengers were on, the large abandoned hotel whose only occupant is a Nazi Peter Cushing, the tree line that the zombies emerge from or disappear into. There's just an eerie vibe throughout the movie. And sure, the movie has a low budget and has to rely on this mood, but damn, it's pretty effective in terms of being a horror movie. Second, the zombies themselves are pretty spooky too. I love the way Wiederhorn has them shot during the movie. Yeah, we see plenty of shots of them from close up. One, particularly of individual zombies, but that's not the most effective shots of the creatures themselves. It's when they are in the distance or when you see them stalking that is really unsettling. In a lot of ways, they remind me of the ghouls from Carnival of Souls, especially as they kind of rise up out of the water and so forth. But they aren't necessarily always stomping around or running towards you, but they are there and they are watching you. It does come across more like they are predators than zombies. In fact, I really don't know if I like calling them zombies. They are technically zombies, as they are undead things that were pieced together, almost like Frankenstein's monster, to be super soldiers. But I do prefer to think of them more as ghouls. They're unnatural, and the way they move and cluster together is unnatural as well and unnerving. It's hard to explain it without actually you seeing the movie itself or the scenes that I'm thinking of when I talk about this, but they still move in formation or in time like they are marching because they are soldiers. They efficiently strike as if they've been trained to. It's not your typical zombie, and the acting of these guys playing these things, quite frankly, is pretty top notch. And thirdly, I mean, come on, man. The concept itself is awesome. We've known for a long time that there was fascination of supernatural stuff with the Nazis. The idea of Nazis blending super science with arcane or occult stuff can send shivers down your spine. And even if it really isn't true or it's not as true as movies or TV would lead us to believe, and that they were trying to find artifacts or objects that held mystical power. It frankly doesn't matter. I mean, they are Nazis. I mean, I can believe any terrifying thing about them. Now, for this movie, the idea that Germany knew they were going to war, so they started trying to build these super soldiers from a cult shit is pretty boss of an idea. Then for that to create these monsters that are, these perfect killing machines, is just a great place to start for this movie. And then we find out that they were too good at what they did, that even the Nazis were like, yeah, we better rein these guys in and do some more experiments or try to figure out what's going on with these. I mean, that's really only helping these monsters be even more terrifying. But lastly, they are created by science and magic. They were designed to be perfect soldiers and killing machines so that they could be called the Death Corps. And they were too good at what they did, so they had to be dealt with in some other way. And all of that leads to them, of course, not following the orders from their commander. In the many years since this movie's release, we've seen zombie monsters, we've seen Nazi monsters, we've even gotten more Nazi zombie monsters. However, this is the concept in its purest form, and I really love the entire idea that built this movie up from scratch. And it's just, I don't know, I like these ghouls or zombies or whatever we want to call them. I think that this was a very finely crafted idea for these creatures. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next week, in the 299th episode of Monster Mondays, let's take in a show. I've got a couple of tickets to see a popular rock band that is taking the country by storm. So let's check out Black Roses. Until next week, stay spooky.